So, good evening to all the friends and seekers who have arrived from near and from far to continue this exciting journey about the mystical rose of the Zohar. Maybe I'll try to use this microphone, especially for the sake of the Zoom. So, good evening for the people who have joined us online this evening. And this is session number 4. Before we go deeper and further into our mystery here, I'd like to say a few technical things. One is that we are not going to have any class of ROSH-ESTHER next week. We realized this had been the original planning, and we got mixed up. So 7 sessions have been planned, not including next week, and then we forgot and moved it to Tuesday because of Thanksgiving. But many people are going away early, so no class next week, and then there'll be 3 sessions in December. It kind of lead us all the way towards, the winter break, kind of like, so all the way down through to December 18th. You can put it down in your calendar. Okay, yeah, so I see a lot of people nodding their head like this. I figure, I also realize you always disappoint someone else who's going away, but so that makes more sense to us, and we're back to the original plan. So once again, next week, no ROSH-ESTHER. You can go do something else, maybe at the JCC, I don't know, somewhere. And then there'll be 3 more sessions to this series until we finish with the season. Then what's going to happen in January and beyond, we'll see, as we'll be figuring out this journey and thinking ahead the next steps. All right, so that's announcement number 1. Announcement number 2 is that we're still trying to, that's my little shenanigan, trying to get, to gather dollars to replace, we've ordered 2 of those new ones, and to take the place of this old broken one that's barely working and very blurry, so that we can, so then one was a generous anonymous donation of someone, and then the other one, I said, well, we're going to micro donations to cover the cost, which is about $1,000. I think we're 30% there, so 70% not there. So if you so wish to help, this will take you to the I guess place on the website where you can do that. Okay. Going back to our course here, so we have been learning a few things about the Shema as a focal point of meditation, right? We actually understand that the Shema is a very important part of Jewish prayer, where a lot of the traditions, the Kabbalistic traditions that have to do with meditation, have to do with how people have been praying the Shema. So if any of you have been part of my search committee, I taught that when I was interviewing. Leah, maybe you were here, so that's my apologies. You'll have to, again, almost a year later, in fact. Crazy, huh? Another thing about the Shema, because every week I'd like to add another, right? So you've already learned that Shema is Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, right? That Shema is breath. Sorry, the name of God that we incorporate in the Shema. So when we meditate about God, right? So if you forgot that one, if you weren't here, right? So Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, the name of God, there's many ways to interpret it, but one important one is that the Vav is our body, and Hey is our breath, and the Yud is our point of consciousness, whatever it is we're thinking about, right? So we learned that. And then we learned about the elephant in the room, right? How Echad and Acher, one and other, right? You kind of meditate on all those things where I'm trying to feel that I'm one, but then, of course, what comes to mind is what is not one with me. Is there some kind of division within me or with me and the world, some discrepancy? And that's actually what comes up is what I need to work on in my life. Right? So if it's actually shouldn't be that easy. Oh, everything is one. Okay, if that's where you are, that's great. But if something is troubling that's something to look into, right? As we breathe into existence, into living in the moment. And then we kind of learned the practical way last week, remember, of saying each word of the Shema with a breath, so that we give it so it kind of goes together with our breath, and we can align the idea of breath with the saying of the Shema, with the recitation of the Shema, and how we take a lot of air before Echad and kind of say Echad until we run out of breath. So it's becomes very physical, that prayer, that meditation. Today I'd like to incorporate another idea which explains why some people take their hand and cover their faces, their eyes, when they say the Shema. Okay? We already know that the hand from the Zohar class, what do we know? That this is what? Remember the cup? That this is the rose, right? From last week, we know that this is the rose, right? So here's another thing about it. From another place in the Zohar, another part of the Zohar. And he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth pebbles from the brook, and he placed them in the shepherd's bag which he had, and in the sack, and his slingshot was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And David stretched his hand into his bag, and took a stone therefore, and slung it, and hit it, and he hit the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. This is from Samuel 1:17. This is a famous story of who? David and Goliath, right? And I'm really going far away from any current events. This is the beauty when we study Kabbalah. We get to talk about the spiritual part of everything, okay? So just like a Sufi Muslim, Sufism in Islam is like Kabbalah to Judaism. It views Islam as an internal spiritual path rather than anything political, okay? And then he said, in Sufi Islam, jihad is never external. Holy war is always between a person and their own shadows. Always. That's a Sufi interpretation of what jihad is. So maybe perhaps similarly here, okay? The David and Goliath, okay, the Zohar teaches us, is actually an internal conflict, right? Because you see, so how many pebbles? How did David slay the giant? With 5 stones, 5 pebbles that he took and kind of made into one, right? And then he hit Goliath where? Right in the forehead. So in another part of the Zohar, they say when you do Shema Yisrael, you take 5 pebbles, all right, and which by the way also translate into Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, and as you make them into Echad, right? But then you also make a gesture. You take those 5 pebbles, you're David, and you're also who? Goliath. Okay, we're both David and Goliath in this spiritual practice, right? So as this goes, it's not I am David or I'm Goliath. People are, you're David, I'm Goliath. People try to portray each other. I'm the David, you're the Goliath, so I'm justified in my violence, right? Because I'm David, you're Goliath, whatever. It's not about that. It's a spiritual practice, right? It says in each and every one of us, there's a giant full of ego, full of and in each and every one of us, there's also a more gentle element portrayed by the youth David. And every day, when we say the Shema in the morning and the evening, twice daily, we're invited to slay Goliath, right? What part of me is a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too full of ego, a little bit, like what? So I take the 5 pebbles and say the Shema, coming back to the Echad Acher, right? I meet that other within me, that Goliath. I'm invited to say what comes up. I'm going to slay that giant. I am David, I am Goliath. Nobody is better than anybody else. See what I mean? So that's kind of the kind of like how we see that there's so many layers, so many levels to this spiritual practice, right? And think about all the people. I'm assuming people were teaching those things, and somebody noticed, oh, the 5 pebbles, right? It's people are adding out of the meditation, out of the practice, a creative way to tell those secrets to the next generations, right? So then a whole new way to look at the David and Goliath story, but also, again, something practical that we can do every day if we choose to practice the Shema. When we wake up in the morning, when you go to sleep, right? So we take the 5 pebbles, right? And we gather ourselves, and soon we'll practice, we'll do the Shema, right? And we kind of said, all right, David, all right, Goliath, right? The interesting part actually is to come to terms with that Goliath within me, right? That I have been that brute today. Maybe I sped up in traffic a little too much. Maybe I was unkind to someone at the office. Maybe I didn't speak kindly to my kid, or to my spouse, or there's, all those incidents of being a bit of a Goliath, right? And kind of acknowledge it and accept it. That's the work, right? So we kind of try to be a little bit better versions of ourselves every day, right, if possible. So again, in Kabbalah, maybe very similarly to Sufi Islam, right? Who brought me this poem? Right? Thank you for bringing it. Right? Maybe we'll read it soon. It's a very good poem. I read it now. Right? We internalize the tradition. It becomes an internal effort to improve ourselves. Right? So the Shema can be. We'll learn more later about the Shema is a moment where you kind of like reenact the roles, just like the Havdalah. But it's also, I can be David, I can be Goliath. Right? And it's something that we work on every day. So let's kind of try to bring this together in a little meditation. So again, I'm inviting everyone to sit in a conscious way, so that's really always a really interesting moment, I think, when we kind of like realize that we're not sitting in a conscious way, right? It's also not in our culture so much to be very aware of how we sit. We kind of just like, sometimes just, right, fall in the chair and then all of a sudden, oh, I have a body. Hello, we have a body. How does that feel to have a body today, right? For a change, right? But then, so we sit and we become conscious of our body. Always a good thing to do, right? Then sometimes at that moment, something we want to come out, like a cough or, whatever. Very, very natural. Once we become conscious of our body, that it would want to cleanse itself a little bit. And then we kind of notice how we're resting on the chair with our feet touching the ground and our head reaching towards the heavens. We can kind of see if we are centered, if we're leaning to the left, to the right, we can kind of try to be as centered as we can. And conscious of the secret of Yud Hey Vav Hey, the tetragram. As we're conscious of the Vav, the body, let us just get our attention focused on the breath, Hey and Hey. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Notice the point of consciousness, the Yud. What is it busy with? It's always busy with something. And as we notice, if you just gently bring it back to the here and now, to the Havaya. And as we are becoming more present in the present, in our bodies, conscious of our present state, let's take a moment to each connect to our inner David, but even more importantly, to our inner Goliath. And I invite us for about a minute to kind of see who is this Goliath for us this evening. What part of ourselves has been Goliath today or of late? When we allow ourselves to meet this Goliath, just notice the emotions, the sensations, the thoughts that are associated with that part of ourselves. And then we're going to be invited to be David in the sense that we will collect 5 pebbles. So if you want, you can do this. You count with your hand, the fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pebbles. And we're going to put our hand to our forehead, covering our eyes. So David meets Goliath. And we're going to be saying the Shema, one word at a time. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And so from this place that has been brave enough to meet our inner Goliath and kind of slaughter/embrace it with this practice of Shema, where Echad, one, meets Acher, other, and David meets Goliath. Let us from this place just prepare ourselves to say the blessing for the study of Torah, and may we pray that this hour of Torah study will help to bring light into the world, in our own lives and our dear ones and our families and community, but also to the greater Rochester area and beyond, to anywhere in this country and around the world, to anyone who's in need of light, maybe somehow in a mysterious way as we study Torah, it'll benefit the world in some way. Let us say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, yeah, it's as we kind of travel in and out of our own inner self and inner world, and how those ancient metaphors meet our own psyche, right? Because that's kind of like the name of the game. We learn these ancient metaphors that people many, many years ago have, they left it there for us in all those ancient texts, right? So texts that look like this, if I'll be allowed to, yeah, right? So texts that look like this. And you look at it and say, what's written there? What's all this Aramaic, right? And then you find such, I would say, to me, beautiful metaphors, helpful metaphors, exercises, secrets that help us understand what is Jewish prayer actually and what is Jewish practice. And also hopefully understand who we are a little bit and help us improve ourselves, right? And connect, and also creates a spiritual language by which we can share things like what's your Goliath today, right? Or how's your David doing? Like we kind of, then we have a vocabulary that we didn't have before to talk about things that maybe we don't always have the vocabulary to speak about, right? So it's very intriguing to see that the ancients have left us this vocabulary. We just have to be able to tap into this as we learn one by one all these tools, all these ideas. Right, so coming back to the other part of our course, we've been reading the Zohar together, right? I always repeat a little bit to go to that we can move forward, right? We've been studying this text basically, right? This text, which is again 13th century Aramaic, written by mysterious people, probably in Spain, probably in the 13th century. We don't know their name. They call themselves Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Chizkiah and different things, but it's not their real names. They're hiding their names, maybe because they're modest, maybe because they don't want to be caught, maybe because they're saying radical things in the guise of very traditional texts. Right? Nonetheless, we have the text, right? And we can read it. And then we have an English translation, lucky for us, right? And then we learn that actually what this text is an interpretation of Scripture. And because it's the beginning of the book, we're looking at Bereshit, Genesis, the first verses of creation, and the Kabbalists love those phrases because, that's the mystery. It's the beginning, the origin, right? It's like a scientist who's exploring the Big Bang and beyond, right? It's very attractive. It intrigues the mind, the heart, the soul. So many interpretations, including the one we've been studying, have been written about Bereshit. And then we learned that, little did we know, we thought that text was a regular text. There's a noun and a verb and an adjective and adverbs and syntax. That all exists, but then for the Kabbalists, it's not literal at all. Right? In fact, we know that our tradition doesn't take Scripture literally at all. Right? We interpret all the time. They take Kabbalistic Jewish interpretation, which is very fluid and dynamic and creative, it is to radical interpretation. Never mind the syntax. You think that's word? That's not words. It's actually a painting, a drawing, right? And they use the word Elohim as a stopper, and they count the words to paint a mystical, mysterious rose that appears in the text, right? And that in itself is a statement about life and reality. You don't take the world at its face value. Look deeper. Where other people see a text that someone wrote, look deeper. There's a structure, there's a painting, there's another form of communication. There's more than one realm to reality. There's more than one level to a conversation, right? We all know this. Like when someone talks to us and we try to see who they are, what is their body telling us? What is their voice telling us? Right? When we try to listen to ourselves, right? That's why this text is connected to these practices, becoming more conscious of who we are and who the others are and what is this world. There's many levels to the story. The Kabbalists tell us likewise, again, the text, right, is just one way is to read the syntax. Another way is to look and say, hey, there's actually a painting here. Who's to say what's more efficient, right? By the way, the mysterious interpretation doesn't cancel the literal meaning. It doesn't mean that the text loses its meaning. It just means that there's other layers, right? Off on a tangent, you may know this Jewish fairy tale from the Talmud about the four mystics who have entered the Pardes, the realm of the secret, Pardes, paradise, the secret garden, and four of them, one died, one lost his mind, one became an other, in other words, left the faith, kind of took into the dualistic nature and said, I can't, it's not for me. So he was lost, kind of. And only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and came out in peace. Not only to say that it's kind of like a dangerous grounds, that, if you go into all those levels and leave the literal meaning of the world, the safe grounds of reality. If you go into trips, right, you can sometimes get lost on the way, right? But I would, just like David and Goliath it's all us, I would say that all of us can be those four, right? And so when you go deeper, you have to be able to die a little, go crazy a little, lose your way a little bit, and then also know that in the end it's okay. We can travel between those journeys. It's okay. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Be happy, right? But it's a serious thing once we are going, from the literal sense into the deeper structures. All of a sudden, there's a rose. Okay? And then we learned about the rose. That's another depiction of it, right? A rose that is depicted as having 13 petals and then 5 sturdy leaves, and is red and white. Red and white being judgment and compassion, the right and the left sides of the divine, of God. So there is God is revealed through compassion and mercy, but also through judgment and harsh reality. Right? It's all divine. It's all divine. Right? And then we kind of learned that this is not just a Jewish thing. Right? That there's the mystery of the rose is also Christian. This is the Notre Dame. This is called the Rose of the Notre Dame. Right? And that it's in that Virgin Mary has these depictions, and that the whirling Sufis the whirling dervishes in Islam, when they do their whirling, they're a rose. You see, it's a rose that's opening to the heavens. Right? We've studied also, we kind of understand that when we study Jewish occult, we're going deeper in our tradition, and in a mysterious way, we're actually also connecting to the other traditions. That's all a repetition of what we've already learned, but it's always good to repeat. right? So it's beyond, again, it's also beyond the boundaries of like our tradition, our religion, our identity. It invites us to open up to a broader spiritual conversation that is not only Jewish. It's very Jewish. The text is extremely Jewish. All the metaphors are Jewish. The text is Jewish. The rose is from the Song of Songs, right? The jargon is Jewish, but the symbols and the truth behind it is universal. Kind of exciting, right? Interesting. We did not invent interfaith dialogue. It's been around for hundreds and thousands of years. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and sometimes other religions have lived side by side and exchanged knowledge. And Jews were part of the culture in Spain just as much as they're part of the culture here or in other places. Okay, so it's fascinating to see that it's a broader thing. And then finally, last week, we kind of went into another aspect of what it means to learn Kabbalah, and it kind of the idea of ritual. That Kabbalah is not a theology; it's a basic practical guide for Jewish practice that has deep meaning, right? And that we spoke about which we didn't speak, which is following the text. The text taught us that, in fact, when we do either Kiddush or Havdalah, more focusing on Havdalah actually, when we hold the cup of the wine, right, with our 5 fingers, right? This could be red or white wine, so the metaphor really works well, right? We do a reenactment of the rose, of the creation. We become the rose, right? This is not something about God over there in the sky. I always say God is not a grandpa in the sky. Maybe God is also a grandpa in the sky, right? But they bring, again, like this, it brings us to us. This is what was last week, right? We are reenacting this. It comes out of our body into the world, right? On the end of Shabbat, which is just before light is created, just like the text that we're reading, right? The text, Bereshit, is just before God said, "Let there be light," and we're studying and we're trying to reinvent that week. Send light to that week that's ahead of us. Taking the holiness of Shabbat, sending it to that week. And we spoke about the ritual of Havdalah that has all the senses, remember? Again, the 5 senses, right? From the mouth to the taste. And we saw how the ritual of Havdalah has all those elements. Sound, fire, wine, right? It's multisensory. So Kabbalah invites us to experience our Jewish rituals in a meaningful, rich way, and it also teaches us that Judaism is a tradition that celebrates the senses and celebrates experience and ritual, not only cerebral learning, also, but not only, right? The intellect is only one of the senses. It's one of the ways to experience the world, and we want to, and then, evaluate our Jewish traditions here. How much do we let the different senses, right? There was a wonderful exhibition of paintings here, for example. We use music, right? How much do we let the sensual and the experiential be part of our life? And how can these deep understandings of Kabbalah help us enrich our Jewish rituals, such as the Havdalah, such as Kiddush, such as reciting the Shema, etc. Okay, so that was mostly last week. And now we're ready to continue. So let's read from the second sentence and kind of go deeper into the secret of the rose. What is this rose? What are we doing with that rose? Right? From here on, light, created, concealed, contained in the covenant, entering the rose, emitting seed into her. Interesting. Right? There are 2 leading metaphors here. One is, the second is right? So that would be the second, or the first actually, that comes to mind, right? So all of a sudden realize something about that mysterious rose, right? That we haven't, maybe some of you have picked up on it already, and maybe to some of us it's like a bit of a aha moment, also alluding to why people don't always teach Kabbalah to everybody. Because the Kabbalistic literature, the Zohar especially, uses very heavy erotic symbols, okay, to teach about divinity and about the world. The world, not just with the Kabbalists, right? Let's be fair, is a very erotic place. We are all here because some people made love, hopefully, some years ago, right? We all exist here because of Eros, and we know that the speaking of creation, Bereshit, right? It has creative energy. It has a lot to do with masculine and feminine, and they're joining together. And nowadays we have masculine, and feminine, whatever. But the general scope of things, right? It's all good. But right, so this about Eros, and then when we read, remember that the first thing that Rabbi Chizkiah, before he said anything, he said, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and then brought a quotation from which book of the Bible? Anyone remembers? Song of Songs. The Song of Solomon, as a rose among the thorns, so is my beloved among the maidens. All of a sudden we understand another thing about the rose amongst the thorns. Right? Because the rose becomes a symbol for a vaginal symbol, basically. I'll spell it out, okay? Because we're all at the age that we can, for that reason, right, emitting seed into her, right? Yeah. So we understand just a moment that the rose among the thorns, right, is basically that symbol. Think about it. Some men in the 13th century are sitting in Spain. Okay, no Netflix, no internet, right? If you want to kind of like reduce it, but think about how radical and revolutionary it is, and why they might want to conceal their name, and why they might want to write the text in Aramaic so that nobody else can understand. They put a few barriers between the reader, right, and the content, because it's not for everyone, especially in a very more traditional society. All those things, you want to study Kabbalah, you have to be 40, you have to be married, all those things, right? It has to do with the fact that often when they talk about the divine and the secrets, right, they bring eroticism into the table, right? And by the way, not eroticism for the sake of that alone, but it serves as a deep metaphor for in the end, the union between the human and the divine and different things, okay, and different parts of our soul. Not that there's anything wrong with eroticism for the sake of eroticism. I'm all for it. Yeah, but you understand why it could be a loaded or something that you might want to say in a more sublime way. Yeah? You had a question or a comment? Anyone here? Yeah.
Yeah, when I see that created, concealed, retained, I think of pregnancy. Something is being created, it's concealed from the world, it's contained in this little.
Absolutely.
So we all kind of.
Right. So.
We get produced.
Right. So I agree with you that it's that symbol with all its beauty and complexity of an organ that is a sexual organ, but it's also an organ that, in the broader sense, gives life, and in which life is created. And think about that. So you see the Kabbalists, right? They're looking at the Torah, they're opening it up, they look at Bereshit, and it's kind of, it's more radical than we have thought, maybe, at first, because it gets better and better, or worse and worse, depending on how you want to look at it, right? So you see that they open the holy book, and what they see is a mystical union, a rose that opens, and right, and the covenant, right, entering the rose, emitting seed into her. But now, what exactly is emitting seed into her, or who? Light. What's that? Light. Right? The light is being entered into her. Now, which light is it? Where did they get to how is light related to this text? Kind of to state the obvious, but right. So after the rose, after they finished painting the rose with words, the next thing that comes in the text is God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But I think there's a nuance which we have to read about. It's actually in the footnote here. So actually, we're going to be brave and read the footnote. Okay. We're going to be brave and read the footnote. Can you read the footnote? Can you see it? Rabbi, and this is important also because, you see, I'm teaching this, but I'm also teaching about Kabbalah and the Zohar in general through this book, how to read it. We already know that in order to learn Kabbalah, we have to learn to be able to read the Bible, and we have to be able to do hyperlinks between different parts of the Bible, because when they're teaching us Kabbalah, they'll talk about Bereshit, and then go to the Song of Songs, and then go to David and Goliath, and then go to also to other places in the Bible, right? But it's not just the Bible; it's also other Jewish texts. Between the Bible and the Kabbalah and the Zohar in the 13th century, there's 1,500 years of Jewish texts, and the Kabbalists, they're aware, and they're assuming that their readers also know these texts. So when people talk about the light, the concealed light, at the beginning of Genesis, here they're quoting the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Hagigah, and this also exists in other midrashic sources. The same idea. What is the light that was created on the first day? Because the light that we see in the world, when the sun, it comes from the sun, let's say, which day of the week was the sun created? Remember? Anyone remembers? You haven't memorized your Genesis by heart? Didn't do your homework? Right? Not the third day? Worse, the fourth day. And the fourth day, God created the sun and the moon and the stars. In other words, so what's the light? That's something you can ask the children in Hebrew school, right? If guys, it's a riddle for kids. If God created the sun and the moon and the stars on the fourth day, what's the light that God created on the first day? It's not the same light, right? And then Rabbi Elazar said in Tractate Hagigah in the Bible and Talmud, 1,000 years or so before the Zohar, with the light created by the Blessed Holy One on the first day, one could gaze and see from one end of the universe to the other. And another version of this Midrash Rabbah said that the one who gazed from one end of the universe to its end was Adam. When Adam was created, he had the secret of that light from which you can gaze from one end of the universe to the end. Think about the telescopes we have today. Maybe we're starting to, right? So, but when the Blessed Holy One foresaw the corrupt deeds of the generation of the flood, that's Noah, right? And the generation of dispersion, that's Babel, the Tower of Babel, right? The generation of the Tower of Babel, it explains it here. He immediately hid it from them. As it is written, the light of the wicked is withheld. That's in Job. Right? So because of the wickedness of humankind, that light has been concealed, withheld from us. It's called the concealed light. Okay?
It's the light of the wicked.
The light of the wicked.
Is that different from the light?
So that light is withheld from the wicked. That's my understanding. Yeah?
Light just means knowledge here, doesn't it?
Well, that's a question. Yes, but in a broad sense, but what kind of knowledge? Light here is not the light it's not the light that we see with our physical eyes, right? He immediately hid from them. Okay, for whom did he hide it? For the righteous in the time to come. Ha'olam haba. Okay, so the world to come in Hebrew, ha'olam haba, the world to come, that's when the righteous ones in the world to come, they will enjoy this light. The wicked can't enjoy that light, they can't see it. But the righteous can. When will they be able to see it? In the world to come? However, the Zohar in another place teaches, in Hebrew, ha'olam haba, ha'olam shekvar ba, the world to come, the world who has already come. In other words, the world to come is not in the future, it's not at the end of days, it's not after we die. The world to come is a state of mind, it's a state of consciousness that is always there if you're righteous. And is withheld from you if you're wicked. Now, I would like to argue that just like we're all David and Goliath, we're all righteous and wicked to a degree. Right? In other words, when we are conscious, when we are aware, when we are loving, when we are allowing that light to be revealed to us, we are more like righteous. And when we're more like the generation of Noah and all those generations, when we're full of strife and mess and messing up, then that light becomes more and more concealed from us. Maybe it's a spectrum even. Right? So now if someone said knowledge, it could be knowledge, but it could be all, but I don't think it's knowledge in the sense of like textbooks. Right? It's an inner light of the soul. What is the name of the book that we're reading? Zohar. What does Zohar mean? Radiance, light. That's what it's trying to teach us, right? Accessibility to that light. Yeah, so maybe take the microphone so that I think the people on Zoom can't hear you unless you have a microphone. Hello, it works.
In reading this earlier, I just wondered, I kind of assumed that the light was God, the presence of God was the light, and that the wicked couldn't see God.
Yeah, absolutely, but then what does it mean, God? Right? Just as we've learned that God can mean Yud Hey Vav Hey, just existing and being in the moment. See what I mean? So again, yes, I would agree that unclear word, God, has to do with the mystery of that concealed light, right? Which the Kabbalists are trying to help us with words discover something that is not in words, right? So yeah. Any more questions, comments, complaints, or points of? Could you please pass the mic to the back there to the lady who would like to say something?
My sense would be light is the force of creation, the infinite, as it literally exists and kind of moves through. And of course, the paradox is there's dark as well. And one isn't bad and one isn't good necessarily, kind of two halves of the same whole.
I agree. When we study those things, we realize that we think about the dualities, masculine, feminine, light and darkness. Not to say that either is one, right? Sense and no sense, right? Literal, not literal, good and bad, right? And notice that the idea that this light is concealed, right? So that light is kind of like in the darkness, right? It's maybe where it's fine. Yeah? Yeah, you got it. Like it's a bit of a maneuver with the microphone, but we can do it. We can use that time for meditation until the microphone arrives.
You left the last slide, but what did circumcision have to do with all of it?
Great question. And in short, I will answer that a lot of and circumcision is a controversial, loaded issue. I don't want to make it's a whole other lecture, but basically, one way to think about circumcision is that there is a mark, there's something that we leave at the place where the male meets the female. So where life is created, we intervene. Now, never mind now the argument about it. Is it cruel? Is it justified? Is it outdated? I'm not going into that. It's that another whole conversation, right? One way to understand It's a good question, thank you. It's a brave question. But when we study Kabbalah, we have to be able to, right? It's basically that we see or we leave a divine mark of the divine in the place where the male meets the female and where seed is emitted into her, even in our, speaking of practices, right? Even when we have intercourse, our tradition is there and God is there. For better and for worse. Again, I'm not saying, some would say skip the surgery, keep the metaphor, right? But possibly, I mean, we're Reformed Jews, right? People are again, I'm not going into the, but yes, it has to do with those things of male and female. And speaking of, okay, this is just that midrash in another version. We're not going to read it. It's the other version of the same midrash, but it's in Bereshit Rabbah. I brought it here. Right, so maybe before that we should read the text until completion. Sorry, I'm like going between slides here because we're very close to the end of that. Right, so from here on, light created, concealed, contained in the covenant, entering the rose, emitting seed into her. Seed that we understand is spiritual, is light, right? This is the tree bearing fruit with its seed in it. So on the third day, God creates the trees, and they kind of take that verse, okay? And you see, so the rose become a rose that is penetrated by a tree. Okay, so you understand that when they read the Torah, they see a rose that opens and a tree that goes in it. Right, a tree, maybe it's, I don't know, like which direction is the tree exactly, right? You can imagine any way you want, but right, but basically, right? So that seed endures in the actual sign of the covenant, brit. The Hebrew word is brit, covenant, right? The same like brit. Brit is a covenant. That's a literal meaning. So it's very good to bring the brit, right? So when you open the Torah, that's what they see. The sign of the covenant, that is the sign of the male and the female, and the energy that flows between them, that creates and sustains the universe. A very important understanding of Kabbalah is that when we look at the divine and we try to understand the world, we look at male energy and female energy. Right? We here at the Reform movement, we have egalitarian prayer spaces. Men and women can be clergy, can lead prayer, can sit together, right? It has taken Judaism a long time to get to that place, and we're not as egalitarian as we think we are. We're not, really. Even though we think we're liberate and everything and emancipated and progressive, we're not all that progressive, right? As I always say, there's 200 years of feminism and 10 million years of history. That's, there's a lot of work ahead of us, right? But the roots, the seed, so to speak, speaking of seed, of that understanding that if you talk about religion, spirituality, God, it can't just be a male conversation. There has to be a female element, and here I would say that the main focus is actually on the rose. That's actually the main focus, right? That is the symbol. Right? Yeah, something, the tree, the seed, but the focus actually on the feminine. Right? That's interesting to see that those men in the Middle Ages sat and that was how they began their interpretation of the whole Zohar. That is how they begin to read Torah, by telling us you want to go into the occult, be conscious of the female energy and the male energy. Anyone? Judy?
So, this is on? From a little bit more of a feminist point of view, it sounds to me more as if the rose is being held up as something, and the divinity it talks about for the bris and the tree symbolizes male divinity. Where does female divinity come?
So that is something, great question. And by the way, there are there are many academic researches, much academic research, you can look it up, has been, and people have written about gender and Kabbalah, some in a more critical way, some, right? So, in fact, all of this is divinity, right? When we'll get later on, maybe not even this semester, to talk about, okay, the tree of life, right? So each one of these sephirot, of these divine emanations, actually are both masculine and feminine. And just like in the David and Goliath exercise, I would say that it's all divine and it's all human. There is an element that penetrates and gives seeds to the rose. That's divine, but the rose itself is also divine, no less. The rose, okay, is what the Kabbalists would call the Shekhinah, right? And the vaginal symbol and the womb, who said womb here, right? That is no less divine than the masculine. It's actually dynamics that happen within the divine realm, but they also happen in our psyche and in our bodies. And actually, for the Kabbalistic thought, everything in the world has feminine and masculine aspect. And something can be, by the way, corresponds to all the conversation now about gender and transgender and identity and people who are they and all the the things that America is very agitated about. A lot of those things you can see that in Kabbalistic thought for many years, but also in other like yin yang and other traditions. So that everything has to is and just because someone has a certain body, let's say biologically, doesn't mean that they don't have masculine and feminine energies within them. And the same with the divine. The rose is part of the divine. Okay, that's a part of the divine that symbolically receives the seed and it gets impregnated, and in the end that gives birth to the physical world. So it's all just like David and Goliath. We have to understand that, and there's no hierarchies really. It's all dynamic, right? So, and yet again, someone else might say, there's all a bunch of men and they're all sitting in the Middle Ages and they're bored and they don't have movies, so they have to imagine it in their heads, right? But okay, that's legitimate as well. But I choose to see it as actually a very brave and amazing thing that those men are bringing in the feminine. And actually, in some parts of the Zohar, they say there will never be redemption in the world until the Shekhinah is not restored to where she has fallen from. Noticing that in their day and age, 800 years ago, the status of women in the world was very not equal to men. And they said that would have to be restored before redemption can come to the world. I think like pre-feminism. We can't call them feminists because they weren't, but sometimes it takes 1,000 years to arrive at an idea, right? And to actualize it. Speaking of processes. Yeah.
Where was that said?
This is a Tikkunei Zohar. In another part of the Zohar literature is immense. It's got lots of parts. So there is a part of the Zohar literature that's called Tikkunei Zohar, and what I quoted now comes from one of the pages there. Yeah, you can pass the microphone to the back there. Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting synchronicity, right, with the upsurge of feminism in the 70s, correlated with a lot of anthropological advancements. And so what was really established and written about pretty extensively was for 100,000 years or more, all of the earth plane, humans understood the divine to be feminine, the God us, and the trinity of the God us was maiden, mother, and crone. And so the understanding was everything existed and belonged within a great circle. And it seemed that amongst humans in these developing civilizations, violence against each other was unknown. And so I love what you said about the directive from the Zohar, that there won't be any redemption without this restoration, or to me, kind of a full circle approach and understanding. And so, to come into acknowledging both quote unquote male and female as describing the the divine.
Right, so without going too much into detail about the various theories, which, I can't, I'm not an expert in any of them, but I think the essence of what you're saying, yes, there is and that is something that Kabbalah, for sure, as you can see from page 1, is very sensitive to, is that as we search for the mystery and as we seek to connect with the divine and to discover that light and to understand the depth of our existence, the story of male and female energy and their peaceful resolution, right, is part of the story. Look at all the wars today and even the elections, and I don't want to get political, or even the wars in different parts of the world and different cultures, and the role that gender plays in many of the places where there's conflict, whether domestic or international, right? And to understand that really that's kind of the right. Once upon a time when I was a rabbinic student and they gave us a semester of gender studies, and when you study gender studies, you understand that everything is gender, everything, politics, economy, nature, right? It's like when you look at the world, and then yes, we don't really, maybe we know, maybe we don't, about what existed 20,000 years ago, and whether it was matriarchal or patriarchal society, and we know that in some tribes things are different, right? But it's pretty clear, right, that the imbalance of the genders, even in our society and even amongst people who, on paper, in the literal sense, say, oh yeah, egalitarianism, but then you look at the life and the choices that are made and how, how different people live, still we're not there yet, even amongst our so-called progressive circles, right? And I'd say, me included, I'm not, right? It's really like that, and that is something to notice when we go again deeper into the secret. But then in the end, like the last chapter is like silence. So I'm preparing you, like we go deeper into the secret, and we always go deeper, but in the end, the deepest secret is a blank page, right? But right, so we see the metaphor of the flower and the tree as masculine and feminine, and we open the Torah and we see Bereshit, and we say there's actually an erotic mystical union, okay, that symbolizes the union somehow of the world, people, the divine, all that. Right, I brought the yin and yang. It's not from our tradition, but I think it's just because it's a very, poignant one, and even to be braver, right? If you look at the Tantra from the Far East, right? So this is a picture of some kind of I'm assuming I think it's Buddhist from the art, but it could be Hindu. I'm assuming it's Buddhist, right? Of understanding that when one meditates and channels the energy, right? And basically, just one would say we're sitting with that rose, right? And let's say the person meditating is male, right? He will unite with the inner female, right? Because somehow there's a union that happens within the soul. You can also make a meditating person who's a female, and you can go either way, right? So, yeah. Somebody from the Zoom wants to speak. Should we let them? How do we do that? Wait a second. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Who was that, actually?
Can you hear
Matthew
me?
Nelson. Are you there, Matthew? Can you want to
I'm
comment
here.
or ask a question?
I'm here. If you can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello,
We
hello.
can't hear you somehow, Matthew.
Weird.
Maybe the TV. Wait a second. Wait a second. Wait a second. Can you speak now, Matthew?
Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear
We
me?
have
Hello.
just discovered the divine secret that unites all realms.
Hello.
It's a remote
Hello.
control.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Matthew. Now you can speak.
Oh, good. Okay. I just had a quick question. I threw it in the chat. I just was wondering, do the Kabbalists at all touch on the story? I know it's not in the Bible itself, but the story of Lilith.
Yes.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was wondering, because it just feels like when I learned the story like only recently, and it's quite disturbing because it's Lilith has this, she refuses to lay underneath Adam and then gets cast out by Adam and God. And so it just feels like a story, and then there's like all kinds of like other ways in which she becomes this like demon and other mythology stuff. But just wondering, it feels like a redemption, kind of like a way in which this interplay of masculine feminine kind of fails like very early on um, in this particular story. So just wondering if that's at all comes up later with the Kabbalists in terms
Oh,
of
sure, absolutely. So, absolutely, there's a lot of Lilith in Kabbalistic thought, and for those of you who don't know, so there's a myth in Jewish tales, midrashim, of Adam's former wife before Eve, or maybe it's another aspect of Eve, right? Whatever you want to look at, it's mythology, right? That she was not willing to subdue herself, right? To be subdued to subjected to Adam. That he, like the Bible said, he shall rule you and you shall obey to him and da da da, right? She was a free woman, and she kind of saw herself as at least equal to Adam and would not play the gender traditional role game, and then she was kind of like sometimes depicted as a demon, as in a patriarchal society, people were afraid of a female that was too liberated, too free, too expressive, too sexual, too having her own wish, want to do her own thing. And and one can ask ourselves, even in our day and age, if that's not something that many aspects in society are still afraid of, right? And are trying to think about just American society and different things that you know about, right? And and then, but there are, however, traditions. We're saying that Lilith actually wasn't a demon; that it was only that it's only demonic in as much as you see it as demonic, in as much as you're not able to understand that yes, women also have desires and wishes and strength and freedom, all those things, just as men do, right? Maybe in a different way, whatever, but just as powerful. And then if you embrace it, it's not demonic, right? And then some Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts, and it's a whole other field of, a whole other course and class. But thank you, Matthew, for bringing it up. Is that in fact Lilith is Chava, right? That is again it's one and the same of the same woman, right? But that liberated Eve would be Lilith, right? And there's many things to say about that in esoteric parts of Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, right? So, and again, so just to say that when we study Kabbalah, we go throughout all those slides, right? And today we've understood an important thing about the rose, and about divinity, and about the way the Kabbalists, and about to see the world, and about the secret, and about what they're trying to tell us, what is our religion, right? And we got to wrap it up in 2 minutes. Yeah, and of course, Lilith would. Thank you for bringing it up. It's part of the story. So, as we progress in this Kabbalistic journey of the rose, right, you realize that the rose among the thorns, right, and is a very powerful symbol. And it was very important for the Kabbalists to place that at the beginning of their book, the Zohar, and at the beginning of the Torah, in fact, in the Bible. Tells this is the key. You want to be able to understand the mysteries. You want to go deeper into spiritual practice and God's light into the world. You have to work with both masculine and feminine energies that are within each and every person, regardless of their gender or physically. It's true for every individual. It's true for families and communities and societies and even bigger human structures and nature, right? And it has to do with political things, and it has to do with energetic things of our own psyche, of our own bodies, right? And yes, for the Kabbalists, gender is much more fluid than again what might seem in the literal and outside of things, which is why you have to conceal this knowledge with symbolism and Aramaic and all sorts of metaphors and they see. So we never promise you a rose garden, but at least maybe you'd agree that it's interesting, right? I'd like to end with a poem. Remind your name?
Gail.
Gail, thank you. Sorry, I'm meeting a lot of people. So, Gail, thank you. You've shared a beautiful poem with us from Jalaluddin al-Rumi, the Sufi mystic, the founder of the Sufi order, actually, orders, who actually is a contemporary of the Kabbalists, right? Same century, very similar areas. And he reads, "What was said to the rose that made it open was said to me here in my chest. What was told the cypress that made it strong and straight? What was whispered the jasmine, so it is what it is? Whatever made sugarcane sweet, whatever was said to the inhabitants of the town of Shigil in Turkestan that makes them so handsome, whatever lets the pomegranate flower blush like a human face, that is being said to me now. I blush. Whatever put eloquence in language, that's happening here. The great warehouse doors open. I fill with gratitude, chewing a piece of sugarcane, in love with the one to whom every that belongs." So that's a Muslim poet, mystic, but all the symbols again are there. So fascinating, right? And thank you for bringing that poem. I think it's a very nice way to conclude. All right, so once again, next week, no ROSH-ESTHER. Go get a turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce. Go wherever that you're going. Cook for your family and friends. Then after Thanksgiving, in December, 3 more meetings on Wednesday, all right? And if you haven't done so yet, consider participating in my experiment of getting us a new Owl Lab camera. Have a great mystical evening, and God bless you all.
Difficulty is going back outside.
Into the world, out of the womb, out of the mystical rose.
I am loving it, I have to tell you.
Great. I'm glad you're here.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna miss the last one because I will be away.
Well, it's all recorded, so in the end,
Yeah.
we're very multimedia nowadays.
What's the image on the left?
This, the
The blue figure with the woman.
so again, comes from a Buddhist tantra. It's basically meditation that uses sexual energy
Okay.
to kind of like reach union or enlightenment,
Okay.
right? So basically, he's, as far as I understand, he is uniting with the woman within, but maybe it's also just. Oh, that's for the. I'm not used to taking cash, right? So they would use also. So in tantra, they would also use actual intercourse in order to meditate.
In order to meditate?
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, of course.
And then
You can try it at home with your significant other.
and the one on the right is Indian?
It's all Buddhist.
Oh, it's all Buddhist,
Yeah.
both of them. Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So when I took my art history classes, they said the Buddhists, like, oh, that's the lotus.
What's that?
It's a lotus flower.
Yes, not a
Yeah,
rose.
so it's not a rose.
It's correct. So in the Far East, it's more of a lotus, not a rose that is.
In fact, and then Renaissance art, they didn't talk about roses, they talked about the lily.
Right,
As
so
the pure.
so again, this flower, we don't know agronomically speaking which flower it was. And in the same article that I read that talked about it being the rose, he spoke about the fact that in the Far East, the same ideas about the lotus, because it floats on the water and it's like meditation, right? And the same idea as. Mhm.
We only have one
Well,
more
the
case.
George O'Keeffe has a better,
Well, there you go. You know, once you start with this, you'll see roses. You'll see it in art. You'll see it in music. You'll see it in literature. You'll see it in poetry. You'll see it
Yeah.
all over, right?
Yes.
I just had one
The song
logistical
Rose,
suggestion.
what she sang.
That's
Yeah,
movable.
from-
Why don't you just
I think it
move
was
this
from one of the movies.
in front of you
Yes.
and put the microphone there and you don't have to hold it?
I could do that
Very
too.
sexual.
Yeah.
Are we gonna get to the chart?
Of the Tree of Life.
Yeah,
Possibly, if not now, then in the next.
yeah.
But in the next.
Always hold something out for the next
Right.
time.
That I actually kind of like to not teach Kabbalah in a more schematic way, because I think that usually people say, "Oh, this is Shekhinah," but I think right now we're absorbing, and then, okay, this is Shekhinah, this is the tree, this is, and then when you get to the chart, it means more to you, right? It's like we're building it step by step, and there's no rush to get to the chart, and we're already studying, and we're already studying about it without knowing that that's what we're doing.
You know Bette Midler's song, The Rose.
Which one?
The
You call
Rose.
me the one.
No. Whoops.
I mean, this book, I really, the author, I think it's an English author, she's published for. I can't.
And it's hidden beneath the snow, but in the springtime, comes out.
There you go.
See? She knew what she was talking about.
A lot of people knew what they were talking about, and then it's nice to see all the connections, right? Beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Maybe we should start a library of all the different poems and pictures, and that people here are, when we study Kabbalah, people are discovering.
We don't have a room big enough.
What's that?
We don't have a room big enough.
Yeah, well, we can start a digital library. It doesn't have to be a physical one. Right?